Dr. Dennis Golphin and myself are so privileged to be a part of this panel of erudite scholars, ivory tower ruminators, to share the Word of God. And our conversation, again, is always based and centered in the gospel of Jesus Christ. He gave us a great mandate that we're to go into all the world, preach the gospel, but he's all reconciling the world, and he's also reconciling us to each other, be it black, white, male, female, Jew, Gentile, upper class, lower class, it doesn't matter. There were all distinctions are obliterated by the blood of Jesus, and we're trying to practically work this thing out. And so before I introduce our topic and our topical speaker today, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dennis Golphin.
Thank you, Van, and welcome to our show for the day. We're looking for a great show to come about, and we want to welcome all of you on Facebook and to our YouTube listeners and to our podcast listeners who are on anchor.fm/talk straight. Yeah, I have to say it backwards for the podcast, but we're looking forward to a great show today and look forward to you sharing with us. Welcome to everyone today. So we're going to turn it back to Van as he introduced Lois to take charge of the show for the day.
All right. Well, again, we have a panel with us today, but today, most of you are aware of already what's going on in Israel right now, the conflict taking place there. And so we decided this before that conflict, but we thought it was time to have a show where we talked about the Jewish Holocaust, 1941 through 1945, I believe, with Hitler. And the reason we could dovetail that issue is because in America, with the monuments and all those things in the Great Fuss, Germany has provided us so many examples to follow that follow a tragedy. And so today we have our resident expert with us, Dr. Lois Olena. And what is important for us to know about our sister, she did her master's in Jewish studies, but when she was studying for her doctorate, which is in leadership, she did her dissertation in new anti-Semitism, I believe. And so she's our resident scholar. So she's going to host the show today. We're going to listen and learn and ask questions of her. And we're just so grateful that she's with us, a part of us, and is going to bless us so in the name of Jesus. So Dr. Lois, thank you for doing this today.
You're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. You know, in the last year, a lot of people have been talking about being woke, and in terms of their awareness of what's going on with racism and having their eyes open to the reality, open to the reality of things that have been going on for a long time, but they are just awakening to them. Well, that happened to me in 1983 in terms of Jewish-Christian relations. I took a course in the last semester of my undergrad degree. I did a BS in Bible at the University of Valley Forge outside of Philadelphia. And that course in Jewish-Christian relations really just opened my eyes. I felt woke. I didn't know to call it woke back then, but it opened my eyes to really the 2,000 years of history, church history, and in terms of relating to the Jewish people. You know, a lot of Christians know about the Old Testament, and some may know about the Holocaust, or some may think about Israel in the current day, but you know, they don't think about the 2,000 years in between, right? So, so after I took that course, I thought this situates my Christianity in such a clear historical context of the first century, and it gave me such a hunger to know the history of Jewish-Christian relations all the way to the present day. So I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to teach Jewish studies in a Christian college setting in our AG schools, because I grew up AG and I didn't grow up hearing this and knowing this and so on. So I looked around and discovered Gratz College in Philadelphia. And one thing led to another, and I was starting a master's in Jewish studies at Gratz. While at Gratz, so the master's in Jewish studies dealt with, Bible, Hebrew, rabbinics, literature, and history. And in my history course, I had a professor named Nora Levin. She wrote this massive book. It's so big, it's fallen apart here over the years. But Dr. Levin, I had her for an entire year on the Holocaust. And when I went to graduate from Gratz and leave, and we were planning to move to Vermont, she asked me if I would transcribe interviews with survivors, liberators, and witnesses of the Holocaust, and return those to the archive to be a part of their collection. And so I did that for 10 years and did over 500 interviews. And I'll put in the chat, Dennis, the link to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, in case you want to add that to the to the Facebook Live part. That collection, the Gratz College Holocaust Oral History Collection, is now a part of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC. And so I felt a unique responsibility as a Christian believer, and of course, as an ordained Assemblies of God minister, and as just a Christian in the world, to understand this, what happened. Jesus said, he came he came to for the lost sheep of Israel. And and so really what you have in the early centuries after Christ is kind of like a Y, the letter Y, what we call the parting of the ways. So down here, you've got on my purple sleeves here, you've got biblical Judaism, right? And then for a while, you've got the first century Judaism, and really up to probably the third or fourth century, you've got so what you could call today Messianic Judaism, right? But then after a while, Rabbinic Judaism and Gentile Christianity sort of split, what we call the parting of the ways. And today, Judaism and Christianity are seen as, these different religions, and with a whole history of what I call the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit in terms of Jewish-Christian relations. And I know Rob is all too well familiar with this history, and of course the whole story of the Holocaust and Bonhoeffer's role and everything. So what I went on to do the transcription, and then when we were getting ready to move to Springfield to be here for ministry, for Jewish ministry actually, and start my doctorate, I began to teach courses on the Holocaust at Evangel University. I taught, and also at the King's University and at the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary. So I taught the Holocaust, Jewish-Christian relations, Judaism, and some other courses. So part of what I wanted to just share today is a little bit of an overview. And I'm just going to very briefly share my screen so that we can talk about this. So we talk about the Holocaust, but really it's the Hebrew word is Shoah. And Holocaust itself means a completely burned sacrifice. And so sometimes Jewish people don't like to use the word Holocaust because they say, I didn't sacrifice. I didn't volunteer to be sacrificed, right? So, but the word Shoah is actually a biblical word, and it means widespread disaster. So in talking about, of course, the two terms are used interchangeably, but the connotation is different. And so a lot of times if you see the word Shoah, that's what that's all about. And then korban means destruction, and so sometimes you'll hear it referred to as that. So this legacy, the context of the Holocaust is you've got a lot of pre-Christian anti-Judaism, okay, because things that set the Jewish people out as unique, like keeping Sabbath, keeping kosher, and observing different things than the pagan or Gentile nations around them, caused those nations to often be against the Jews. Why are you circumcising your children? Why don't you have your store open on Saturday? This sort of thing. So there is a record of pre-Christian anti-Judaism, but we have then what's called Christian anti-Semitism, and really that's actually a misnomer because that's like saying Christian racism. There shouldn't be such a thing, right? But because the anti-Semitism took place within the context of European Christianity, it's referred to as Christian anti-Semitism. And there's a whole history that's been documented of I can't talk about all of this in 1 hour, but just to say, there are a lot of resources and things that I could share with you that document that history. It goes all the way up to modern anti-Semitism. With Christian anti-Semitism, if a Jew is being persecuted for being a Jew, they could pretty much convert and get out of that bad situation, right? But modern anti-Semitism begins to be this. The basis of it is racial or blood kind of connections, and it doesn't matter if you convert or not. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew, and this is what we saw in the Holocaust with having a Jewish grandparent, or the one grandparent far off. Even if you might have been living, quote, as a Christian, if you had a Jewish grandparent, you could also be persecuted and sent to the camps. So the Holocaust is really the culmination of this history. The history didn't cause the Holocaust, but as many scholars like to say, the Holocaust would not have happened without this history. Hitler has been quoted as saying, "I'm just finishing what the church set out to do." And you think, what? That doesn't make any sense. But when you look at the writings of Martin Luther, and I'm going to just zip through here, but this is a quote from Luther. So at the beginning, Luther was very interested in Jews, and he wasn't hopeful they would convert. But then after a while, he's speaking out against persecuted Jews. Then he takes kind of a missionary approach. Then he gets disappointed that they haven't converted. And then finally in 1543, he has this complete plan for dealing with Jews. And he says, first, their synagogues should be set on fire, and whatever is left should be buried in dirt so that no one may ever be able to see a stone or cinder of it. Jewish prayer books should be destroyed and rabbis forbidden to preach. Then the Jewish people should be dealt with, their homes smashed and destroyed, and their inmates put under one roof or in a stable like gypsies, to teach them they are not master in our land. Jews should be banned from the roads and markets, their property seized, and then these poisonous and venomed worms should be drafted into forced labor and made to earn their bread by the sweat of their noses. And that just sounds, this is 1543 from Luther, and we could talk about Luther all day too, but these vitriolic things that he said toward the end of his life became a part of this German context. And so at the eve of World War II, there's a huge population of Jews in Europe, and Jews who had been in Spain in 1492, just before Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and actually economically linked to it. Jews were expelled from Spain and ended up both in the Levant, or in the land of Israel, and also in Poland and this area here. So you've got key dates with the Shoah. You mentioned 1941, but really when I was recording stories of survivors, we would anyone who existed and was impacted by Hitler's reign from 1933 to 1945 is considered a survivor. anybody that was under his reign. And so he comes to power in 33. You have restrictive Nuremberg laws in 35. You have the Anschluss, which is the, quote, peaceful overtaking of Austria in 1938. You've got Kristallnacht in 1938, the Night of Broken Glass, where the Nazis attacked stores and broke the glass in the windows and took men into concentration camps and burned synagogues. Then by 1939, September 1, World War I begins, and you've got him invading different countries across Europe. The invasion of the Soviet Union takes place in 1941. In 39, Hitler and Stalin agreed to a pact, a non-aggression pact, and Germany has one side of Poland, and the USSR has the other side. And supposedly, Hitler was going to leave it alone. Well, obviously, he doesn't take. He breaks that promise, and he invades Poland, takes over all of Poland, and then you've got the invasion of the Soviet Union itself. And the Einsatzgruppen are these mobile killing units that go into this area on the western side of the Soviet Union and begin killing Jews and gathering them up. Took some of them to labor camps in Siberia. A lot of the stories, I wouldn't say a lot, several of these accounts that I read were survivors from the Soviet Union who had lived in the Soviet Union and spent the war in labor camps in Siberia under incredibly difficult circumstances. Some of them actually had to fight for Russia and went through that whole experience. And of course, then liberation. Let me unshare for a second, and I can get to unshare. There it is. So this brings us up to the point of looking at what constitutes a survivor, right? What kinds of stories did I hear? So as all of this is taking place from 1933 on, I mean, I have Jewish friends that even from 33 to 35, they were still undergoing terrible restrictions and fear and not knowing what was going to happen in their lives and in their homes, their families. So there were different ways for people to try to get away. There were restrictions in the United States on immigration. And those that came often could only have, they took a great, incredibly horrible loss to their economic stability by having to really liquidate everything and often just coming here with a few marks in their pocket. One lady came with one extra dress and to the United States, and she sold that dress, and with the profit she made, she bought 2 more dresses, and with the profit she made from that, bought more dresses. And that was the beginning of her being able to even survive in the United States and do work. So a key for us as believers looking back on this, thinking about this whole history, it's important to look at, what was going on with the church. As the Nazi agenda was playing out, going through these steps, you've got identification, who are the Jews? You've got restrictions against those who were identified as Jews, then deprivation, lack of food, lack of living space. When the Jews were herded into ghettos, they were deprived in numerous ways. You've got concentration, both in ghettos and in camps. There are lots of different kinds of camps. You've got transit camps and labor camps and concentration camps. And then you had death camps where they were just sent to die, to be killed. You've got deportation from one area to another area. And then in those areas, you've got the process of selection. You're going to live, you're not going to live. Exploitation, starvation, and ultimately annihilation and extermination. So as all this is going on, and you've got ghettos and camps all over. The death camps were only in Poland, but you've got all these other kinds of camps all over the place, and you've got ghettos being established in these areas. You have the whole question of the church, okay? And this brings us to what we call the German church struggle. Now, keep in mind that I'm trying to think of who it was, maybe Mitch Glaser. It was either Mitch or I've got the dissertation upstairs, but he did his dissertation on Jewish believers in Jesus as their Messiah who were who perished in the Holocaust. And he has estimated 250,000 Jewish believers perished during this time as well. So that's it's always important to acknowledge the Jewish loss, but to also see and understand the other losses that took place. You've got, let me see here. You've got 6 million Jews. Then you have 5 million non-Jews, which included 3 million Polish Christians, 500,000 Roma, or what some people call gypsies, 5 to 15,000 homosexuals, and then you've got the political prisoners or Soviet POWs, 3.3 million Soviets, 8,300 British and American political prisoners. Then you've got Jehovah's Witnesses, 10,000 were imprisoned, and an estimated 2,500 to 5,000 died. And of course, this is taking place all across Europe. And there are a lot of things going on during the German church struggle. You've got the Catholic Church, which there was a concordat in 1933, and I think one in 33 and one in 37. I don't have the dates right in front of me, and it essentially sort of an agreement. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. Don't attack our Catholic people, and we won't challenge what you're doing. And so with the German church struggle, essentially you've got different responses. Some are for Hitler. Different aspects of the church are for him. Some are against him, and some are undecided. And I think I'd like to just pause here and maybe ask Rob to chime in and talk about Bonhoeffer for a moment and the confessing church as those that were, clearly Bonhoeffer was against Hitler. He gave his life for that cause. He was rescuing Jews. And his life really epitomizes the midst of this German church struggle. When you look at this picture here and you see bishops, with the Heil Hitler salute, that picture epitomizes what was going on. And I think we've seen very similar things in our day.
Yes.
The concerns about which side are you going to be on? What does your Christianity say about the incredible crisis politically, racially, socially that's going on in the world? And where are you going to stand? You can't just hide in your closet, because if you do, then you're in that in-between place where your indecision is going to cost you or cost someone else. Anything you do is going to cost, okay? Whether you're for, against, or undecided, it's all going to cost. And I use my hand as an illustration when I teach the Holocaust, the pinky being the victim, the smallest, most vulnerable, okay? And then the one next to the pinky is the perpetrator, okay? So this is sort of the Nazis, they're perpetrating. But then you've got collaborators that are working with the perpetrators, right? They're right next to them attacking the victims, right? But then you've got the bystander out here. looking on and watching that collaborator and perpetrator and going, oh, I don't know, maybe I don't know what I'm going to do. But what's important is this person right here, the rescuer or the resistor, can impact the victim, can save the victim, can work against the perpetrator, can work against the collaborator, and can influence the bystander. So let's be the thumb in life. Let's see the picture, see the larger picture, and do whatever we can do to work for justice, to work for biblical, godly responses when people's lives are being shattered, when the image of God in humanity is being destroyed. And that's what Bonhoeffer did.
Okay. Rob, you might as well jump in. That's your segue right there.
Wow. Well, first of all,
Good luck.
Thank you. Lois, thank you for that presentation. And I knew it would be a masterful one, and indeed it was. That was a lot of information flow in a short period of time, but I think you hit on all the critical elements here. For me, this is all very personal. For one reason, because of course, Van, you know my folks, you know my family. My father was born to Jewish immigrants who fled Russian persecution before the turn of the last century. In the 1890s, they set out from the Pale of Russia, where Jews were being conscripted into the military service, basically as cannon fodder. They were put on the front lines of any battle anywhere just to take the first hail of bullets. And it was a clean way of killing Jews, of eradicating Jews. And the family members saw what was coming. And his grandfather, my great grandparents, Isaac and Leah Schenck, although we're not sure that was the actual name at the time, somewhere along that persecuted pilgrim journey, they picked up a name, Schenck. When I go to Holland, the Netherlands, I'm always told Schenck, that's like Smith or Jones here. You're Dutch. So no, I'm not Dutch. It came first of all through a Hungarian connection in the family, but we don't know where that name came from. We don't know if our original name was Seinkar, something different. But in any case, they fled. They went first to Hamburg, Germany, where they sought safety, and then eventually sailed to the United States, arrived just before Ellis Island opened. But we had enough family connections back in Europe that I grew up with the fears and the anxieties that family members were being murdered during the Third Reich, had been murdered during the Third Reich, and that some were suffering in Russia at the time, in the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union. They were in the pogroms and other places. So there was this family data coming from distant places. But when my cousin married the daughter of Holocaust survivors, both of whom had the prisoner numbers, tattooed. Thank you. that was a synapse gap there. Tattooed on their forearms, and I think most people know this. That's one of the signature marks of Holocaust survivors, is the blue tattooed number.
Right
there we go.
This is a book Doug and I edited, a survivor friend of ours, and we did, that was his number, and we did this book, helped him get his book out.
There it is. Well, my cousin's wife, her mother was forced to play in the Auschwitz ensemble that sat at the gate of the most notorious death camp Auschwitz in Poland, occupied Poland. And the job that she had was to serenade those condemned who were on their way to the gas chambers and to calm them by playing music. Now, just imagine this. The only way for you to survive is to assist in a tortured, diabolical way. And yet, the human drive to survive is such, she did her job. She didn't know whether she would be murdered at some point, but she survived. I don't know how her husband, they both passed. I don't know how he survived, but that's how she survived. So this was married into my family, a survivor. And by the way, if anyone wants to talk to a survivor, you can actually do so now through high tech, through holographic technology. I saw this when I was at Oxford University several years ago, and they debuted at the Skoll Foundation forum, where they bring in social entrepreneurs from all over the world, some of the most brilliant minds working on giant scale human crises around the world. And they debuted this technology where a Holocaust survivor, most of whom are now in their 80s and 90s, or even in their, centurion years, have sat with a bevy of cameras around them, 150 cameras arrayed around them, and they create a three-dimensional hologram that is interactive, so you can ask questions of the hologram. I sat with a man named Pinkas from Toronto, who I believe has since died. He was in his 90s when he sat, and it's phenomenal computer technology, artificial intelligence, although it's built on the human intelligence of the subject who sits there, and you can talk. So I don't know what the banner is now. They used a Holocaust in hologram, I think was the banner at Oxford, but it's changed names several times since. But it is accessible. Maybe Lois, you know about it. You can find it. Just put Holocaust survivors holograms or holographic, and you'll find them online. And you can access this and experience a conversation with a Holocaust survivor, which is a life-changing experience for anybody. But there's another reason this is very personal for me. And that is because my father kept a contemporaneous scrapbook during the Nazi horrors. His brother, my namesake, Captain Robert L. Schenck, was a B-17 bomber pilot over Europe, over the European theater. He dropped bombs on the Nazis. And I'm named for him, Captain Robert L. Schenck. He survived a record number of missions, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Purple Heart, because he was wounded with shrapnel that entered his aircraft and pierced his legs. A number of other awards. Survived the war, got out, became an import-export business owner in Havana, Cuba, doing business mostly with Florida business partners, then decided he hadn't done enough for his country. So he re-upped to fly in Korea during the Korean conflict. And ironically, was taking a group of soldiers to Japan, to Japan for a weekend of R&R and shopping. And his own ground crew vectored him into a mountain, and he crashed. 39 soldiers died with him in that plane crash. And I was the next born male. So in Jewish tradition, the next born male gets the most recently deceased male's name. So I was given his name, Robert L. Schenck, Robert Leonard Schenck, and I bear that very proudly. But to think about a Jewish man flying over the European theater, bombing the greatest threat to Jews ever in the history of the earth, is kind of a mind blower for me. And I've gotten the other side of that, because when I traveled through Germany during my studies on the life and work of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I heard from the people who were under those bombs that my namesake uncle dropped on them. War is never a clean subject in any way. There are no absolute villains or absolute heroes in wartime. Even the innocent suffer. And I know that my uncle, from the stories I've been told, suffered terribly thinking of the innocent victims of his bombs.
Right.
So these are things that travel through my head whenever this period of time in European history and world history is told. But here is the scrapbook that my father kept contemporaneously during the war. It's falling apart now. I really should rebuild it, but you can see it here. And in that scrapbook is a photo I was raised with. I remember being probably 5 years old when I first saw this photo of what remained in one of the camps when it was liberated, the ashen remains of human beings, and under it, the mass graves, bodies of Jews and others lined up like cordwood.
Mm.
And this is tough for me to show you, because I remember trying to understand it as a 5-year-old. I was sitting on my father's lap with my identical twin brother, Paul, on the other knee. And Dad was paging through this book. And we both said, what is that? Why are those people like that? And Dad said, and Van, you remember my dad, Hank Schenck,
Yes.
of blessed memory, passed in 2009. And Dad said, this is what happens when good people do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up with that ethic, that you don't ignore human suffering, because there will only come more suffering, including your own, after that.
Mm.
Now, this has become even more meaningful to me. And Lois, thank you again for your tutelage in this subject matter, because of course, the whole backdrop to the Dietrich Bonhoeffer story is in fact the Holocaust. Without the Holocaust, we would not know Dietrich Bonhoeffer. This is what he reacted to. Bonhoeffer started out ambivalent about this. First of all, he was a German patriot. He loved his country. He loved his German culture. He was a product of the German aristocracy.
Mm-hmm.
His father was a famous psychiatrist in Germany, sort of a counterpoint to, to the prevailing theories of psychiatry in that day, which were largely Freudian. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer's father was contrary to Freud, had a whole different school of thought. Today, if you drive into Berlin, you will see the Bonhoeffer Institute. Well, that's not an academic institution. It's a psychiatric healthcare facility named for Bonhoeffer's father. So, he came out of the highly educated class. He grew up in the upper middle class, really the upper class in Berlin, but took on Christian ministry, even though he was raised in a largely non-religious family. His older brothers were scandalized when he announced that he would study theology. They said, "You are going to serve a moribund, meaningless institution, the church in Germany. It's irrelevant. It's sclerotic. It has no contribution to make in modern society. And it's corrupt." And Bonhoeffer said, "If it is irrelevant, I shall make it relevant again. If it is corrupt, I shall reform it." At age 14. A lot of audacity there
Yeah.
in a kid. But of course, he grows up to at least attempt those things in a very, very big way. And married into his family is Gerhard. What's the matter with me? All of a sudden, I'm having another brain drain here. Liebholz, Gerhard Liebholz, who was his brother-in-law, married to his twin sister, his fraternal twin sister, Sabina. And Lois, what you pointed out, that even Christians who had Jewish bloodlines could not escape this. Liebholz was one of the first academics. He lectured in law at 2 universities. He was fired immediately because he was Jewish, or excuse me, because he had Jewish bloodline. He was living as a dutiful German Lutheran Christian, a member of what is known in Germany as the Evangelische Kirche, the evangelical church of Germany. He was an evangelical, but he had Jewish blood, like I do. And he was fired from his post. He would eventually have to flee Germany with Bonhoeffer's sister, Sabina. They would go to Oxford, where he would teach at Oxford University in safety. That was a great agony for Bonhoeffer because he loved his twin sister dearly. She was his closest confidant, and to be separated from her was enormous pain for Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He would eventually himself go to England for safety because he became part of the confessing movement within the church in Germany. I was in the little kitchen in the manse, or the what do we call manses? Parsonages. In the parsonage in Berlin, the church where Martin Niemöller was pastor at the time. Niemöller was a German patriot. He was a war hero from World War I. In World War I, he was a chaplain as well in the German Navy. Now a pastor, leading pastor, very popular in the equivalent of kind of a megachurch preacher here in the United States, in Grunewald, which was the neighborhood where Bonhoeffer grew up. And Niemöller was a qualified critic of Hitler and the Nazi Party. He was a Nazi. He was a member of the Nazi Party, but he was a kind of internal critic. He would eventually be arrested and confined to a labor camp, which he would survive. Niemöller would survive that. And Bonhoeffer was in the circle that would eventually become the confessing church movement. In that kitchen that I stood in the parsonage in Grunewald, Berlin, that's where the Pastors Emergency League was organized, which was a response of the church to the heresies of Nazified Christianity in Germany. There was a movement called the Deutsche Christen, the German Christian movement within the Evangelische Kirche, the evangelical church in Germany, and it sought to both Aryanize Jesus,
Yes,
to portray Jesus not as a Jewish man of the Levant, a dark-complected, afro-haired, first-century Jew, Middle Eastern Jew, but in fact, a tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Scandinavian-looking, Teutonic personality. This was all deliberate, calculated. What have we got here?
I'm showing what you're talking about right now. Those that
Great.
were for him, and then those that were undecided, and those that were against. So what you're talking about right now, the German church, you can see Hitler with these individuals, and so I just wanted to put the picture to elaborate on what you're talking about.
Yes, and there's a kind of lore, a fiction that's been written about Christians in Germany of all stripes. Those who were part of the established German Lutheran Church, which was a quasi-government agency. I mean, the clergy of the Lutheran Church in Germany were on the government payroll. They were considered civil servants, government employees in Germany. But there were many, many other churches and sects, Baptists, Pentecostals. Lois, you mentioned, the Jehovah's Witnesses. There were Mormons. In fact, one of the first religious activists to publicly go up against the Nazis was a Mormon boy. I think he was 17 years old. And like Sophie Shaw of the White Rose Society, which if you have not seen the film Sophie Shaw, Scholl, Sophie Shaw, everybody has to see this film, but you have to be in a certain mood to watch it. This was a 19-year-old university student who organized opposition to the Nazis, and she would be beheaded at the guillotine, and so was the Mormon boy at 17. And when it's not grotesque, it's not bloody, but when you see the mechanized way that the Germans used the guillotine, it portends what will happen in the mechanization of murder in the camps.
Mm-hmm.
Watch this. So, you had some contrary voices, but for the most part, even the pacifists, the peace churches like the Moravians, they either supported Adolf Hitler and Nazism, or they were those bystanders that Lois spoke about. They kind of sat it out and just said, it's not my fight. I'm not into politics. I'm not going to cause trouble. I don't like controversy. It'll sort itself out. Some people said, Hitler's a buffoon. He won't last long. He'll come to nothing. The German people will reject him. This isn't going anywhere. And they just sat it out. Most Christians, and I'm talking about including born again, Bible believing, gospel preaching, witnessing, soul winning Christians, sat it out. Now, I'm just going to say one last thing, and I know our time is running out here. So I'm going to recommend some books on all of this. First of all, you want to read about all this and the disposition of Christians in Germany at the time. Here. So what? Yeah, Lois is giving us, how does our theology affect our action? What is the church's responsibility when it comes to fighting injustice? How important is it to us to struggle with issues within the church that in reality may be a matter of life and death? These are lessons from Christians during the Holocaust. And I'm going to show you, here's a book by Victoria Barnett. Lois, I'm sure you know Vicky. She's a neighbor of mine, literally. She lives just down the way, and we do a lot together. She wrote For the Soul of the People. Protestant Protest against Hitler, which is an examination of both sides, those who did speak out, but they were very few in number, a tiny minority in Germany. And she did this while living and working in Germany. Then Faith and the Fatherland, Parish Politics in Hitler's Germany by Kyle Jansen. Highly recommend it. Betrayal, German Churches and the Holocaust by Erickson and Heschel. And finally, this one, which is very disturbing to read through. A Church Undone, Documents from the German Christian Faith Movement. This documents the Deutsche Christen in Germany that wholeheartedly supported Adolf Hitler. And among them was this guy. And any preacher, pastor, who's Bible teacher maybe, who's watching us right now will recognize this.
Oh, yeah, Kittel.
Theological Dictionary of the New Testament by Gerhard Kittel.
Yeah.
When I was at Elam Bible Institute, several of my professors would say, well, you got to check Kittel, go to Kittel, see what Kittel says. Even Bonhoeffer, in his prison correspondence, references Kittel. Well, Gerhard Kittel, you'll find this on the bookshelves of every Bible college and seminary in the evangelical spectrum. Gerhard Kittel was Adolf Hitler's house theologian, resident theologian, who basically gave him the theological rationale for the annihilation of the Jews. Never recanted, died a Nazi after the war, after Hitler's suicide, after the collapse of the Third Reich, after the victory of the Allies, after the reorganization of Germany and Europe. Gerhard Kittel remains a dyed-in-the-wool Nazi, racist, anti-Semitic, Jewish annihilator. Nobody ever told me that.
Right.
No one ever mentioned it. We were using Kittel, routinely consulting Kittel over and over and over and over again. No one ever said, anybody know he was a Nazi? Now, that doesn't necessarily disqualify him as a New Testament exegete. He was fabulous on Greek, absolutely one of the best. That's why Bonhoeffer references him. But why didn't we discuss this? And I think it's not because of ignorance, though that was certainly a factor. I think it was because of denial. And denial is part of remaining the bystander. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it. I certainly don't want to speak it. There's nothing wrong with us. We're all good. You guys are bad. You are all the evil ones. We're all the good guys. We're wearing the white hats. I'm sorry to say that's often literal. We're the white guys. You're the black villains. You see how all this works together in a diabolical cycle. And so that's finishes my commentary.
Well, if I might interject in this moment, I think Dennis would probably agree with me that we definitely need to go one more week, because I've got a lot of questions. Like, I wanted to talk about what about the fact that Hitler, his pre-concentration camps where he used as an experiment in Africa. He used the Africans first before he started his camp there. Secondly, I wanted to talk about the contrast and comparison between what happened in Germany and what's going on in the United States as well, you know. And then I think a really important issue we want to discuss too is how is it, you mentioned this, Rob, how did they transition from Jesus being a Middle Eastern brother to all of a sudden the Aryan Brotherhood, and how that changed history that has impacted all of us to this day. And Lois, that last thing you put up that showed the different questions, I think that those are kinds of things that in America right now, if we don't learn the lessons of that history from Germany and what happened with the Jews, then we're just doomed to repeat it. We're going to see it again. I think we really need to push that truth. And that's why if Dennis agrees, I would love to see us spend another week on this, but with a lot more dialogue, inner dialogue between us, because this is relevant to where we are in America right now.
It is.
Do you agree, Dennis? Muted. You're muted, Dennis. You're muted, Dennis.
I know, Van. I was trying to put all these links that Lois had onto the Facebook page so we could have that research there. And I do agree with you. Lois, I love the presentation. It was wonderful.
Yes.
Rob, always love your insight in this whole thing. And when I share a lot about the Reformation, and you brought up something that I was just smiling about, because Martin Luther in his later life did have a lot of problem with the Jews, and people that teach on the Reformation and teach on Martin Luther's life try to cut off that latter part of his life when he says all those things you brought up about Jews and what they do. So when we teach on the Reformation, you find guys not even talking about that part of Martin Luther, how cynical he got in his old age and some of the things he did with that. So I think that this whole thing has been tremendous. And yeah, we really need to talk. There's a lot. Those slides you presented were good, and I want to see the rest of them.
Yeah, that's a course right there I'd love to have.
Yeah.
Well, I've got tons more. And, I just want to say one 30-second thing here, and that is, we've all heard racism doesn't go away. It just adapts. It just morphs and changes. Well, that's really been the nature of anti-Semitism. The word anti-Semitism was invented in 1879, but anti-Judaism has been around for a long time. And then, we have the whole question of the new anti-Semitism, which, a lot of people say, oh, slavery, everything, all that was resolved in the 60s, right? With the Voting Act and blah, blah, blah. Well, it wasn't. And in the same way, people say, oh, anti-Semitism, that's a thing that ended with the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
But it continues day by day by day today. And that's why I wrote my dissertation on the new anti-Semitism, because we have to continue to be vigilant about all of these things. When someone made in the image of God is being crushed and destroyed in any way, we Christians are compelled to respond to that and cry out and make a difference however we can.
Yes.
So,
I find out too, in closing, is that when people evangelicals shoot down Martin Luther King Jr., that, his life wasn't all together and you're trying to make him so great. Well, Martin Luther, he wrote a book called All Jews Are Liars. I mean, if he was not a racist as the father of the Reformation, and no one's bringing out that sign, but, to be fair, a lot of church fathers hated Jews. A lot of church fathers hated females. I mean, it's just amazing. We just have more paradoxical history than we like to acknowledge. But until we acknowledge that, then we can get to our own personal ugliness, that we're saved, we're being saved, and God help us all. But in America, if we're going to make it, we really have to, I think it was Soren Kierkegaard, life is lived going forward, but understood looking backward. And we're looking back at the Jewish nation, because between the Jews and Black America, there's a lot of contrast and comparison. The one major difference I see that we can talk about next week too, is that the Hebrews were set free from Egypt. They came out of that land and they came out of Germany. Well, Blacks in America did not come out of America. We're still here. and we've had to face that issue for sure. But I think there's so many quality parallels, Rob, Lois, that you shared with us today that ought to touch everyone's heart, that we can learn from Germany, learn from that situation, and then put those lenses on and look at America, and it'll probably scare us to death, or better yet, scare us to life, to wake up. epistemological self-consciousness. I mean, we need to come to it. So I appreciate Dr. Lois, Dr. Schenck. You're both sharing, but I think we should continue next week. And then as the other panelists, we'll have questions for you. But I think everybody listening to this program, Straight Talk, today and in the future, there's so much to be gained right here on this program that could really help America if we would only open our ears. So with that in mind, Dennis, I should close the show at this point. You agree?
Yes.
But thank you, Lois, the time you took. Rob, I felt your heart. Lois, I felt your heart and your head. And now my head hurts. And what a blessing this show has been, because we're not trying to just deal with one particular ethnic group, but the Bible says nation fighting, ethne fighting against ethne. And there's so many things should be spoken that those that have a heart for God will hear and be like Lois said. We want to be that thumb. We want to be that thumb in the program that's touching everything for the glory of God. So I hope you are blessed today. And I say the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon each one of you and give you shalom in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen and amen. God bless you.
Amen.